So with us today we have Si Hughes from our Liverpool podcast Walk On, also lead writer for the newsletter Phil Hay as well. Right, gents, let's get into this. Liverpool have been active in getting rid of players in the market, notably Fabio Carvalho, who went to Brentford for £25 million. But I guess the issue is bringing players in has been a bit of a problem. Martín Zubimendi turned down Liverpool. Shock, horror, real talk. Simon, why has this move not happened? And also, how much should Liverpool need a player like that?
Well, a few weeks ago, Liverpool had encouragement that Martín Zubimendi wanted to sign for the club. Richard Hughes, the new sporting director, has a pre-existing relationship with the player's agent, who also represents Andoni Iraola. And earlier this year, obviously, Richard Hughes was leading the process for hiring a new manager, and the agent also represents Xabi Alonso. So pretty early on in that process, they found out that Alonso didn't want to come to Liverpool, or that he wanted to stay where he was because obviously he was doing so well. So the relationship's pretty close. So this is where it gets a bit confusing, really, because Liverpool had taken encouragements from the agents that the player wanted to come. Then a week passed, and then it became apparent that the player wanted to stay. So it'll be interesting to see where Richard Hughes' relationship with this particular agent is now, because Liverpool have wasted quite a decent chunk of the summer on the player that they wanted to sign. The club is adamant that there isn't another player who they're going to bring in as a replacement, that he was the number one target. But it certainly leaves them short in the midfield area, in the number 6 role, the term that everybody uses now, which Arne Slot wants a different function out of that player from Jurgen Klopp. I think it's the biggest distinction between the two managers and how the teams are going to play. He wants a ball player, somebody who is going to be progressive and try and carry the ball up the pitch a little bit more. Obviously, at the moment, last season they had Endo, the Japanese midfielder, who's more of a breaker up of play. It's quite clear that Arne Slot doesn't really fancy him. He hasn't really played him in the pre-season friendlies, so it leaves Liverpool short. And Arne Slot would be understandable if he was a bit frustrated by the outcome.
Phil, can you understand it though? I mean, look, in terms of that number 6 place, that number 6 role, Declan Rice, Rodri. When you get it right, it's absolutely spot on. You see how pivotal those kind of players can be for Premier League teams. But for a lad who's, born and bred in that region, hometown hero. I mean, yes, a big club comes calling, but you can understand why he might want to stay at home. His friends are there, his family's there, that might be settled.
It feels a little bit like there's still a missing piece from this puzzle, and I'm looking forward to hearing from Zubimendi, if we do, to find out how this process went from Liverpool thinking that they could get him and believing that he would be very receptive to a move, and it actually being made to a degree straightforward by his release clause. Okay, the understanding was that had to be paid in full, but it sounded like Liverpool were ready to commit to that. How we moved from that to a position where Zubimendi, kind of said categorically, look, I'm staying at Real Sociedad. And it's not a secret that players who play for clubs in the Basque region can be and tend to be extremely loyal to them. Zubimendi goes back a long way with Real Sociedad. And so when it comes to the point of him explaining why he stayed and why it was that he said no to Liverpool, I think we'll get a bit of a clearer insight with this. In terms of them missing out on him specifically, I think even taking Declan Rice, Rodri out of the equation and out of the conversation, Zubimendi just looks like a terrific player, and it's a shame for Liverpool because I think he would have been perfect for them, really perfect fit, as good an option on the market, and I say available, not as it turned out, but seemed to be available as there is anywhere else. And on the basis of that second half in the final of Euro 2024, where there was suddenly this Rodri-sized hole in the centre of Spain's midfield, which you thought was advantage England and really would play into their hands. Zubimendi's performance, which was really majestic in those second 45 minutes, on that basis, it would have surprised me if nobody had tried their luck with him through the summer, because he did look that good and he looked tailor-made for the Premier League. I think he was tailor-made for Slot's tactics as they will look at Liverpool. And also, to consider the fee in the region of about £50 million, it's it's a very kind of sensible and affordable fee for big Premier League clubs these days. I don't know exactly what Liverpool's financial position is, but that doesn't feel like it's beyond them. So for a lot of reasons, it made total sense, and it seemed like the right fit. And I guess if they're saying, look, without Zubimendi on the books, we don't really have a fallback option in the transfer market, you can kind of understand why.
So does it worry you that basically this is a position Liverpool have really struggled to really cement? You look at players that they've lost out on: Tchouaméni, Caicedo, Lavia as well, now Zubimendi. Should it worry Liverpool fans that they're not able to secure the services of such top quality players?
I can understand why people are worried. The thing is, I mean, the only opinion that is getting tested here is Arne Slot's, and it's quite clear that he wants a player in that position, and they're going into the season without a player in that position. It's very clear to me that, having watched some of his previous teams, that it's a specialist position really, and now he's having to play players who have obviously been at Liverpool for at least a season, who I'm not quite sure whether they're the player that he needs in that role. Obviously last season started with Alexis Mac Allister playing in quite a deep position. Now it'll be interesting to see how he responds to that and how he uses Alexis Mac Allister, because what Jurgen Klopp wanted from Alexis Mac Allister in that role is different to what Arne Slot wants. So maybe he might suit playing in that role in an Arne Slot team in a way that he didn't quite suit it. He's better later on in the season, higher up the pitch, I would say, Alexis Mac Allister. But there are other options, but the problem is that there isn't a natural player that he has on the books at the moment who you could say, yeah, I can really see him making it there. Maybe somebody might make it their position. I know there's been a bit of talk about Curtis Jones, who, okay, he's been in the Liverpool squad for a number of seasons now, but he hasn't quite taken a position by the throat. And I think there's a reason why that is, because Curtis Jones is a very talented footballer who tried to adapt his game to be in the Jurgen Klopp team, where the things that Klopp naturally wanted out of Curtis Jones went against what naturally came to him. And I think he did well to prove himself in that environment. I actually think what Arne Slot is asking him to do potentially in the central areas of the pitch might suit him a bit more. So maybe, who knows, he might evolve into that player. But it is concerning. Yeah, it is concerning, because quite clearly Slot feels that at the moment they don't have that player, and he wanted to sign one and he hasn't got him, and it doesn't look like they're going to be able to get anybody else in.
I think it's, the question that Sai's almost asking there is whether anybody is good enough for this position as the squad stands. And I think on the basis that they've moved for Zubimendi, it tells you that Liverpool don't actually think anybody is, or that they could do with elevating the quality in that role. I was just going to ask Sai, really, on the basis, I mean, because these days, your top clubs don't tend to have massive long lists of players. It's not a case often of, we want him, we can't get him, so we'll just get something else to plug a position. They tend to be pretty picky about who they go for. And you've seen this with City a lot over the years, that they'll have quiet windows if there's nothing that works for them. And if they can't get somebody that they're after, they'd prefer to sign nobody in that role than to just spend money to get a body through the door. What it made me question, and maybe Sai can answer this, is if Zubimendi wasn't attainable, if he'd said 2 months ago or a month ago, look, I'm not interested in leaving Real Sociedad, I won't be going, there's no point in trying to sign me, would Liverpool have had this quieter window anyway? I mean, was it always, particularly given that they've got a new coach through the door, was it always the intention that the business would be this limited?
Yeah, that is the $1 million question, really. I mean, I think Liverpool have operated on that basis previously when Michael Edwards was the sporting director. Obviously, Michael Edwards is now above Richard Hughes. He must be steering him throughout this window. It's impossible to see how sort of Michael Edwards is just stepping back and not having any influence on what's going on. I think a lot of it is down to availability. I think back to when Liverpool signed Mohamed Salah, for example, and he was one of several players that were presented in front of the manager at the time, Jurgen Klopp. And Klopp didn't really fancy any of them, and they had to redraw the list. And there was a long list of players that Liverpool felt that they could get in that position at the time. Salah certainly wasn't the only one, which again, I suppose, says that they didn't really envisage the impact that he would have. Now, this summer, it's a bit of a different situation in terms of the messaging coming out of the club. They're firmly saying that this doesn't mean that they're just going to revert and try and sign somebody else. That could be a bit of gamesmanship, I guess, because obviously now every other club in the world knows that exactly what Liverpool are after. They know exactly or roughly what money they have to spend, and they know how desperate they are. So Liverpool certainly don't want to be sort of held to ransom over any other players. But Liverpool will know. Maybe I'm giving them a bit too much credit, but clubs tend to know which players are available ahead of time because of the conversations that they have. These conversations will have been happening over a number of months. And it is possible that Liverpool don't feel that the players that are available are just quite good enough for what they want or better than what they already have. They might feel that they can get along with what they've got for the time being until the player that they really want becomes available. There might be other players that they really want, but they might just not be available at this moment in time.
Yeah. So I'm just thinking about potential problems someone like Arne Slot might have in signing future players. I guess of the calibre of someone like Zubimendi. Real Sociedad are a quality team, technically brilliant, but it's a team that kind of hovers in the top half of La Liga. Liverpool, proven Premier League winners, Champions League, all that kind of stuff. But then, I guess, does the name Arne Slot scream, oh yeah, I want to work with this guy, when not many people know of his prowess yet?
Yeah. Well, obviously we mentioned earlier in the podcast about, obviously they missed out on a couple of, three players over the last 2 summers. Bellingham, which Liverpool sort of stepped back from, Tchouaméni and Caicedo. Now, the circumstances are different around those players. Caicedo, they came into the process of trying to sign him very late when it seemed like Chelsea had a big head start on him and already really convinced the player that that was the place to go to. Obviously, Tchouaméni, they were coming up against Real Madrid. It's obviously a hard argument against Real Madrid, much harder arguments against Real Madrid. And then with Bellingham, Liverpool definitely wanted to sign the player, but they decided that the amount of money that they would have to pay to get him would be too much and end up impacting on the other players that they'd be able to get, over the course of the summer. It's up for debate whether that was the right decision or not. So in the past, there's absolutely no doubt. I mean, Virgil van Dijk, when he signed for Liverpool for a world record fee for a defender, said, explicitly that it was Klopp really that he was signing for. The manager made it clear that he was his number one choice. Obviously loved him when he met him. Players wanted to play for Jurgen Klopp, and I think what hasn't really obviously been tested, I know Michael Edwards has had a lot of credit in the bank off the back of the Klopp era. Before Klopp came to Liverpool, it's fair to say that his record was mixed. I think the two of them sort of, the two of them brought the best instincts out of each other. So by working for Jurgen Klopp, it became a manager who had very clear idea of what he wanted out of a team. It made Michael Edwards' job a lot easier because he knew exactly what Jurgen Klopp wanted in a player. Meanwhile, obviously, if you're a sporting director and you've got a legendary football manager standing by your side, it's a much easier argument. So Michael Edwards' ability of trying to get players through the door, obviously it's not his responsibility this summer, it's Richard Hughes's, but that dynamic hasn't really been tested in a non-Klopp environment yet. So I don't think, if I'm being honest, players will be desperate to sign for Liverpool for Arne Slot, but he could be, that could change with time, of course, and it could become a club that players want to sign based on the quality of the football that he is promising to deliver. But yeah, I mean, it's alarming. I mean, Liverpool have missed out on a player who, as you say, is playing for a mid-table club in the Liga. I think there is context that's needed around why he wanted to stay there as well. We sort of touched on it. It's a Basque club, and he's turned down other clubs as well. Other clubs that wanted to sign him, Bayern Munich, Real Madrid have been looking at him. Barcelona, I believe, have at least inquired whether he wants to go there. He's certainly not in a rush to leave his club. he wouldn't be the first player as well. I mean, let's not forget Liverpool fans, some of them being a bit unfair, I think, because Steven Gerrard, didn't want to, he said one day he wanted to leave Liverpool to go and sign for Chelsea, and the next day he realised it's going to be a big mistake. This, so it does happen in football. I think people just see football now, and it's partly down to the way, I suppose, that some of the football clubs like to orchestrate the PR campaigns, that we're in charge of all this that happens, everything is this sort of ceaseless process where everything goes right. The reality is, it often doesn't, and people, do sometimes just change their mind.
Yeah, I think this is actually less about Arne Slot and Liverpool than it is about Zubimendi. I mean, Sai's just touched on a point I was going to make, that Zubimendi has a track record of attracting interest from very, very good big clubs, the big two in Spain, Arsenal as well, Liverpool now, and sitting tight. So I suspect that with probably a large percentage of other targets of his calibre, Liverpool might have pulled this off and done it in quite a straightforward manner. But there evidently is something in Zubimendi's head that is keeping him at Real, or something in the background at Real Sociedad that is keeping him there, and it might be as simple as loyalty. There might be a new contract coming down the line. But just to go back to what Sai was saying right at the very beginning, Liverpool would not have gone after this in this way if they didn't believe that it was there to be done, and if they didn't believe that Zubimendi, was keen on the move to a certain extent. There'll be criticism of Liverpool, but it doesn't change the fact that there are a lot of competent people in the building, and they just don't gamble on a whim with deals like this. They'll have thought it was doable.
Okay. Well, want to have your say on the Liverpool situation? Well, send us an email on tafcpod@theathletic.com. And while you're there, you might also as well let us know what you'd like to hear more of. That's tafcpod@theathletic.com. Right, let's unpack what's going wrong a little more then with Phil and Sai as well. We've got no Zubimendi and apparently no need for a plan B, which isn't a great start for sporting director Richard Hughes, as Gerard M on The Athletic writes. And Gerard, yes, we do see those comments. There's lots of them, and especially lots on this topic in particular. Gerard also says, so far, Liverpool have failed to sign Virgil van Dijk on a new deal, failed to sign Trent to a new deal, failed to sign Salah to a new deal, failed to sign their top target in number 6. But guys, don't worry, you can't judge LFC right now. Apparently, we have to wait until the end of the window. Poor start for Richard Hughes and the new football operations team. Simon, do you buy that poor start for Richard Hughes and the football operations team?
Well, I don't think you can blame Richard Hughes for the contract situation with the current players so much, because that predated, his arrival, really. Maybe there could be an argument that things should be a bit further down the line at this point. But my issue with the contracts of the 3 players that were mentioned there is that this should have been sorted out long ago. And I think it's symptomatic of the drift that happened at Liverpool, certainly in the last 2 years of Jurgen Klopp. And fans don't like hearing this, because Jurgen Klopp is a god at Liverpool, and understandably so because of what he delivered. But the reality is, my impression, based on the conversations that I have around with people at the club, is that he ended up with a bit too much power. And last summer, when, in my view, Liverpool should have been making sure that some of these contract situations were sorted out, the sporting director, who was an appointment of Jurgen Klopp, who was only basically allowed to bring players to the club, wasn't a part of the process of renegotiating all the way through the time at Liverpool over the last sort of 6 or 7, 8 years. Mike Gordon has been the FSG president, who is the man who basically releases the money and the guy who signs all these things off. Now, Mike Gordon's own position at Liverpool over the last couple of years has been uncertain. He's stepped aside for certain periods. He's come back into the picture. And this has just allowed the situation to drift to now, where it's a point where I would say you can't really blame Richard Hughes for inheriting that situation. Well, you can't, can you? You could say, well, maybe he should have addressed some of the issues already, or be further along the line, because it sounds as though Liverpool aren't any closer to signing any of the, or re-engaging any of these players. And I feel sorry for Arne Slot here as well. It's not really it's not helpful to him. As a new manager, he is now going to be asked week after week after week after week by the press, and it's going to be a part of a conversation amongst the fans that what's going on with the contract situation now. He has no role in this. He's the head coach. Let's not forget now at Liverpool. He's the head coach. So he cannot answer those questions. Only Richard Hughes can answer those questions. And yeah, it's probably going to be left to Arne Slot to answer them. He's going to have to do all his media commitments before and after games. So this is where it's going to be interesting to see, is Richard Hughes going to be more approachable, because it is ultimately up to him now from this point onwards. When Arne Slot was appointed as Liverpool manager, I thought it was a progressive thing that Richard Hughes was open to answering questions. I think you're going to have to do it more to take the pressure off Arne Slot. You're only going to help the manager by doing that, I think. And ultimately, I'm sure that's what the people who've appointed him want to happen.
The three contracts are a real hospital pass, I think, for Richard Hughes, and also this new regime, the new sporting structure. There isn't a club anywhere who would want to have players like Alexander-Arnold, Salah and Van Dijk down to such a low level contractually, and I mean the problem now becomes that in theory you can present them with a bright future and reasons to sign up, but I think as this goes on, and particularly if it is a window that doesn't work out, players like that are going to want probably going to want to test the water a little bit before they decide whether Liverpool is where they want to be, and you still have that sneaky feeling that someday down the line, Salah especially is going to wind up in Saudi Arabia. The difficulty with creating a structure like this, or at least from a PR perspective, is that you obviously have some really intelligent people in the building, Michael Edwards in particular, I think, but Richard Hughes as well, who's worked at Bournemouth. And I saw this a little bit at Leeds when Victor Orta was running the recruitment there. Leeds could be very pleased with themselves when things went well, and were never shy of telling you how pleased they were, and sometimes justifiably so. But the problem with that is that when you start to present yourselves as the cleverest people in the room, or very clever people in the room, people start to judge you on those standards and hold you to those standards, and they start to look and see and I think particularly to inflate criticism of the things that go wrong. And it is unfortunate for Liverpool that they've put this structure together. They've brought various very competent, as I said, people who do look to have a large amount of talent. But the first deal they've really gone after, Zubimendi, has failed in the way that it has, and looks like a pretty bad misstep. So I do definitely have sympathy for Richard Hughes. I just wondered, and again, Si can answer this better than me, whose head this will fall on, if it turns out to be a window that cost Liverpool this season. It goes without saying that the head coach or manager are always in the line of fire. But from a structural point of view, would the buck stop with Edwards? Would it stop with Hughes below him? Does it lie with somebody else? Who ultimately is responsible for this?
Well, this is the thing. Accountability is the word, isn't it? And I think certainly Liverpool supporters, certainly local supporters, like to see accountability and authority. We don't see it very often in society anymore. And the problem with the sort of the structure that they put in place is we're still not quite sure, and I'm still not quite sure who is signing off these deals. So is Mike Gordon still signing off the contracts, or is Michael Edwards now, with his role at FSG, permitted to take that role? Because Mike Gordon was very protective over that. It was FSG, not FSG money, it was Liverpool's money, but it was ultimately reflecting on FSG, everything that he signed off. So straight away, it's particularly relating to the contracts. Is it going to be Michael Edwards? Is it going to be Richard Hughes signing it off? Or is it going to be Mike Gordon? I think that needs to be made clear so people understand that. So far, and I think it'll continue, Michael Edwards has no public responsibility. So it is all on Richard Hughes, certainly publicly, and his name is the one who's going to be, I suspect, certainly over the next month now. I mean, it could inadvertently help Slot to some extent. That it's quite clear now that it's certainly not his responsibility in terms of why players aren't coming through the door. But as you said, Phil, maybe had it been a Jurgen Klopp in charge of the club, maybe there is the debate. Well, would he have been a bit quicker to sign for Liverpool if Klopp was there? Does Slot have that name and that credibility in the bank to bring players in? So I think it needs to be. It would be helpful to know who's in charge of what and who the book actually stops with. At the moment, it's still very unclear, and the structure means that that this debate will carry on happening. And it sort of shines a light on all of them, really. I think when you put that structure, it's important to explain exactly who's in charge of what, really.
I think you made a very good point as well, Si, in that it's fine for people like Richard Hughes to be speaking publicly in benign moments where he can present a really clear picture of what's happening and make everything look spick and span in the background. But I'm always fascinated to see whether that sticks and continues when things don't go so well. And I think for all that Richard Hughes has said so far, people have probably never wanted to hear from him more than with regards to Zubimendi and what comes next. And I guess we'll see.
I think the big problem for Liverpool, and certainly for FSG, and this is where, the criticism is fair, that they have said countless times, that they believe in FFP, that they live in a real economic world where, the players that they sell, all the money goes back into the club. That is all true. So the season before last, they allowed Firmino, Keita, Oxlade-Chamberlain, and okay, let's be fair, Milner, they weren't going to get any money from at that age. But they let three players who they spent a lot of money on go for nothing. So again, that puts more pressure on the transfer budget. Now, this is even worse because potentially they're allowing three players who I would estimate in any good period would field possibly as much as anything north of £200 million. That's a big hole really in the budget. So they haven't been smart at certain points in terms of knowing when to engage the player, when to get the player to commit, and equally when to let the players go. People might argue, well, that Firmino, that they were right to keep on holding for the length of time that they did. There might be an argument that Mohamed Salah last season still scored the goals that he did, and equally when the big came in for him from Saudi Arabia, it wouldn't have allowed them to reinvest in the squad because of the short time frame before the closure of the window. I understand that, but if they allow those two players to leave for nothing, I mean, it really doesn't reflect well on FSG and the strategy in terms of what they're doing, because quite clearly that they're losing out on a lot of money that ordinarily they'd be wanting to reinvest in to make sure that Liverpool still have a strong team. Three massive holes to fill if all of them leave, particularly a local player. We've been talking about local players in Zubimendi. Liverpool isn't an easy club to leave. There's a distinct possibility that Trent Alexander-Arnold could become, the first local player since Steve McManaman to leave on a free transfer. Somebody with all that ability. I mean, to allow that to happen is bordering on neglect, I would argue.
Okay, well, let's move on. Let's talk about the football and actually Arne Slot, because, Liverpool do have a new manager and he's got his own style and he's been successful in the Netherlands with that style, a style that's passionate, intense, demanding. Si, I know you spent some time at Feyenoord end of last season. What did you see that embodied this manager's style there?
Well, there is some context needed. So they were playing Zwolle, who I suspect will get relegated out of League One.
Probably not the best assessment then, is it?
Maybe it's a bit unkind, but they weren't a very good team, and it was the end of the season, and there was nothing really left to play for. But you could see sort of the respect that Arne Slot had at Feyenoord. The fans loved him, and you could see the sort of patterns that he'd obviously successfully instilled into the team, and it was a lot more patient. It wasn't certainly by no means as gung ho as the first 3 or 4 years under Jurgen Klopp. I mean, Richard Hughes was at pains to sort of say that it's a progression, well, not a progression, but an evolution of the football that they've been producing under Jurgen Klopp over the last 3 or 4 years. And I can see that argument. I've always felt for the first 3 or 4 years under Klopp that the football was just a lot more exciting, and it became a little bit more patient, albeit with the context that, Liverpool almost had to play that way. When you're a team to beat, you can't really counter-attack the opposition. You can't really allow the opposition to have more of the possession. You've got to use the possession more yourself. Whereas I would argue that under Klopp, sometimes felt that he wasn't asking the team what to do, what naturally came to him at times, and it was awkward to watch. At certain points, let's not forget two of the last 4 seasons under Klopp were disappointing, I would argue, and certainly the last season ended disappointingly. I think that Slot will be asking the players to do things that probably comes a little bit more naturally to some of them now. And the really interesting thing that I thought was how the players certainly in the centre of the pitch were asked to dribble a lot. You'd see the full back sort of flipping inside, certainly the right back, which would suit Trent Alexander-Arnold, and not just sort of holding his position in the centre area of the pitch and spraying the ball around. Geertruida was being asked to really join the attack. So what happened was they were very patient in possession early on in the game, would wear the opposition down, testing the centre halves by low crosses, wearing them down. And what I really liked about them is when they got a whiff of control, they really went for it then. That was when they wouldn't race into games, but as soon as they were 1-0, 2-0 up, they then went for the throat and killed the opposition off. So it was a different sort of strategy, really. So it'll be really interesting to see, I think, how the fullbacks are used in this team, and how the there's more of a number 10 role in a Slot team, whereas it was more, I hate using numbers, I've got to be honest, but under Klopp it was more 2 8s and a 6, wasn't it? Under Slot, he sort of pushed back against this suggestion, that there's a 6 and an 8 and a 10, but I could see that pattern a little bit more. I think there will be a player ahead of the sort of the deeper two who will become more of a playmaker, if you like. And it'll be interesting to see who takes that role, because in pre-season, 3 or 4 or 2 or 3 of the players have had a go at it, and all looked like they've been enjoying themselves, to be honest. So yeah, I mean, Harvey Elliott's been spoken about as a potential player who might play in that role, and Dominic Szoboszlai as well, potentially even Alexis McAllister. But I think now that Liverpool haven't got that number 6 role, he might end up playing there.
Yeah, Phil, I was just reading a piece by Greg Evans, titled Arne Slot, what's it really like to play for Liverpool's new head coach? And basically, Greg Evans goes and talks to so many people that have played with Slot, and something that really comes out here is the fact that he really is attentive and really works with his players. There's a story about Santiago Jimenez, the Mexican striker that plays for Feyenoord, and Slot realised that he wasn't quite up to scratch, so he created a special program for a player like him to get better, and actually his stats were fantastic. I think he scored 38 goals in 63 appearances. Should that comfort Liverpool fans that they've actually got someone who could help someone like there's a striker up front for Liverpool, we know, so Mr. Darwin could potentially need an arm around him, that a coach takes so much time to get the best out of their players.
He sounds to me like a personable guy. I mean, I've been following our coverage of him, right back to the big read that we did on The Athletic about why it was Slot that Liverpool went for. Adam Crafton's done some great writing on him. Sai's done some great writing on him, and obviously referenced the piece that Greg did as well. The theme that comes through from it is that Slot sounds like a very, very good coach, which I think is extremely important, because how it's shaping up at Liverpool, it's going to be a real true test of his coaching skill and his coaching talent, because he is essentially taking on existing resources at Anfield. And I think if you're inheriting, say, the mess that's left behind after Roy Hodgson, or if you're picking up the pieces when it's finally run aground under Brendan Rodgers, and you've got existing resources, you can make those little incremental improvements that people appreciate and people notice, and you can use what you have to make the team better than they have been previously. Sai's right that not every season has been great under Klopp, but it's still a very high bar at Liverpool, and I actually thought that Klopp did a very good job putting Liverpool as closely in contention with City and Arsenal for the title last season as he did. What that means is there isn't so much leeway for Slot. He's not picking up a shambles. He's not completely redrawing a club that, that needed a massive reset. They've gone for a reset, and perhaps it will do them good further down the line. But this is fundamentally going to come down to how well can he build a team? How well can he coach a team? How clearly can he get through to them about how they should be playing, and how well will it work? Certainly there's going to have to be some serious man management, particularly of people like Salah and Van Dijk, if their contracts continue to dwindle. But I was kind of saying in the newsletter when we wrote about Zubimendi yesterday, that this window is a really strange way to back an incoming coach for his first season, particularly at a club like Liverpool. But I think particularly at a club like Liverpool when you're replacing somebody like Jurgen Klopp. It is the fabled big shoes, and it's a real surprise to me that especially given how far out Klopp telegraphed the fact that he was leaving, it's a surprise to me that there hasn't been more of a strategy devised that would have given Slot some fresh blood.
I think that there's a couple of things here that need to be stressed. I think that it hasn't really been spoken about much or written about at all, I must say, but I think a lot of the players at Liverpool were ready for the change, and you can see that. You can see there's an enthusiasm. There's been an enthusiasm in the performances, certainly in the pre-season friendlies, certainly from what I'm told in pre-season training. Obviously, Jurgen Klopp is a legendary manager who the players respected, but I do. You could see by the end of the season, I think it had run its course really at Liverpool. Obviously, in an ideal world, you'd want the Jurgen Klopp of 2015 to 2020, 8-9 years along the line. I think the players did need a different voice with new ideas. So I think that's important. But I think as well, there was a feeling from within the club that some of the players, Klopp hasn't quite got the most out of some of the players that are there as well. And there's an intrigue to see how Slot potentially could get some relatively easy wins early on by improving some of these players and asking them to do slightly different things. And then also, if Liverpool were to go and spend the sort of money that, let's face it, every fan wants them to go and spend, and show that they're serious, that's always the way people think the football clubs operate in when they're serious about winning trophies. But if Liverpool spends a lot of money on new players, that straight away puts a huge amount of pressure on, even more pressure on Arne Slot than there ordinarily would be. So I understand what you're saying there, Phil, in terms of he's inheriting a high bar, but quite a lot has changed in a relatively short period of time to sort of, I don't want to say lower expectations, because I don't think the expectations are low, but make people a bit more realistic about what is to come. So I think the big thing for Arne Slot, the big question mark is how he handles disappointment. And equally, I think back to Jurgen Klopp, he's had a lot of disappointment in his career. People always think that, they were getting a great football manager, which they were when he came, but he'd been relegated with Mainz. He had a really disappointing season before he left Dortmund for Liverpool. He rescued that season. He obviously had disappointments at certain points in his Liverpool career, but he always managed eventually to find a way back. Arne Slot is still relatively in his infancy in management, and has had a lot of success in a short period of time with Feyenoord. He very rarely went on there weren't many long runs of defeats. That the pressure and the criticism that's going to come his way if Liverpool do hit a bit of a rut, it'll be really interesting to see how he reacts to it, because I don't think he's been tested in that environment before.
Yeah, on that point, I also think about, how much time you give someone, Phil, right? If things don't technically work out as perhaps fans might want to see it next season, this season for Liverpool, it's Arne Slot's fault. But like anyone who started at any new job, it takes you a bit of time to get your feet under the table. Look at Pep Guardiola, even someone at his stature taking over Manchester City. It's a good season and a bit before those ideas started bedding in. Temper this sort of enthusiasm for wanting top four Champions League football with some realism, surely.
Do you know, it's still a really good squad, isn't it? It's still a quality Premier League squad. And I think that there's a danger that what's happened with Zubimendi and also the contractual matters in the background put a downer on what could still be a good season for Liverpool. I find it hard to imagine that they're going to be as close to City and Arsenal this time as they were last year. But I think Sai's right. I think people will be realistic about whether that's possible at the moment. I guess the good thing for Slot is that to take the Zubimendi deal that didn't happen, Liverpool saying, if it's not Zubimendi, it's nobody. And we'll see whether that comes to pass, whether that's true or actually whether they do have something up their sleeve. But if it's Zubimendi or nobody, then that suggests that they're playing the long game and that they're prepared to play the long game no matter what. And they won't get deviated even if it doesn't work out and even if there's criticism and pressure. So that would suggest that as part of that long game, Slot's going to have a good opportunity to fit into it. But how many times over the years have we seen clubs talk or hint at long games only to bail out of them as soon as the going gets difficult? And I guess that is going to be the thing for Liverpool. What Si was saying there about dealing with disappointment, probably not only Slot, but it's going to be Liverpool as well. You know, having the backbone and the courage to stick by this and to say, no, this is the right decision. He is the right coach for us. It's going to be a process of getting everything into place for him so that he can properly compete. If they can do that, fine. But I think there are going to be points at which Slot is going to need some, strong and supportive management from above.
Yeah. Fantastic. Right, before we go, Phil, I know you are in charge of the Athletic FC newsletter. Anything we should be thinking about right now? Anything jump out for you this week at least?
Oh, we had a lot of fun writing about Conor Gallagher this morning.
He's back in London now, isn't he? From what
he is back in London. Yeah, it seemed to take him about 6 days to get on the plane. It's now almost a week since he was flying out for his medical. It's 4 days since Atletico pictured him on their pitch at their stadium. The sort of preemptive shot of we're about to sign this guy. And all it needs is for Atletico to pull the lever, but they haven't. And yeah, he's flown back to London, and we're waiting to see what happens next. I think even now, despite the fact that so much is agreed with it, he can't tell if he will be joining, or even, to be quite honest, if Atletico want him.
Oh my goodness. Well, I tell you what, you guys make sure you keep your eye out for the Athletic FC newsletter in our articles on The Athletic at this moment in time. Right, Phil and Si, thank you so much for your time, and also more on Liverpool. Do not forget to check out the Walk On podcast as well. And if you're enjoying the podcast, don't forget to leave us a review and a little rating as well. We'll be back tomorrow for another deep dive into the biggest story in the world of football. Thanks for listening. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.